Do I think love is enough for marriage? Hell no. I think it requires so much more than love. Probably love is a tiny fraction of what keeps our marriage together. And that's probably not the most romantic thing to say. Love is important, but it is not everything. Welcome to Fem MD, real talk for women who are balancing careers, ambition, and the chaos that comes with it all. Today's episode is brought to you by the Hippocratic Collective. Check out our shows and content at hippocratic-collective.com. Let's talk about something very fun today, something kind of hidden. I rarely talk about our marriage, mainly because my husband is such a private person. He would cringe if he knew I was recording this episode right now. I purposefully did not tell him. But we will keep it PG-13 here. I'm married to a wonderful man named Corbin. We met 12 years ago at a bar. This was like pre-dating app for all of the younger listeners. And what's funny about us meeting is it was so indicative of our future in that he was pretty shy. We played pool. He did not ask for my number. And it was kind of snowy outside. I had one beer. Then I left. I was in medical school. So I was like, I'm getting out of here. Got to go home, go wake up early and study. The roads aren't going to be great because it was winter in mid-Missouri. And this loser didn't ask for my number. Like, God damn it. I thought he was cute. I thought we were flirting. I was really bummed. Well, fortunately, we were in this kind of small area, Columbia, Missouri. He had a very unique name, Corbin. And so the next morning, one of my friends was over. We were just kind of chitty-chatting. And I was like, yeah, I met this really cute guy at the bar last night. I was kind of bummed he didn't ask for my number. And she was like, oh, well, and I will say she's kind of like me in that she's just not afraid of a lot of things. She's kind of out there, more of an extrovert than I am. But she was like, oh, obviously, just look him up on Facebook, send him a message, see if we'll go out for a drink. And I was like, okay. So I searched Corbin in Columbia, Missouri. And sure enough, I found the man that I had played pool with the night before. So I sent him a Facebook message and said, hey, something to the effect of, I had a great time last night. Here's my number. Let me know if you ever want to go out for a drink. And here we are 12 years later, happily married with two beautiful boys. And I think it's indicative of our future because look at us now. He is my rock and I am the wind that is constantly blowing around him. You know, he's very solid and stable and he's always in a very pleasant mood. I'm all over the place. I've always got these giant business ideas. I'm the one that's a little bit more demanding in our relationship. And so I think if we think back to how we very first met, it's just so comical because it's so fitting. And then honestly, when I met him at the bar that snowy evening, it really wasn't the best time for me to meet a guy. It was my second year of medical school. We were getting ready as a class to study for our first huge exam. Really, probably most medical students would say the biggest exam of your career. The score that you get on that exam dictates how competitive you are for whatever specialty that you want to go into. At the time, again, I don't want to speak for med students now, but at the time, most med students would study for that test for about 6 months. And so it was funny when we started dating, I was like, well, I'm very busy in school. I'm also very busy studying. And so you can come over I'd look at my clock and I'd be like, you can come over for 45 minutes. And if you want to bring me food, that would be great because I haven't eaten all day. So he would come over, he'd bring me food, we'd hang out for a while. And then I would literally set a timer and be like, you have to leave. I think that was good for him to see because as our relationship progressed, I went into residency. Now my career has always been a very strong part of my life. And it's not that I ever hid that up front. I was very forthright with how important my career and education has been. I know some of you out there have like lists of what you want in your future partner. You want this and this and this. I was really the opposite. I had no clue what I wanted in a partner. When I met him, I thought, wow, something about this just feels right. You know, it's easy. I can tell him anything. I can trust him with anything. I think the most important thing for me is that he is just kind. You know, he's a very wonderful kind human being in all directions. I think for me, looking back on the past decade, it's important that we have evolved together. You know, when you meet someone for the very first time, when you start dating, even when you decide to get married, that's not who you both will be in 10, 20, 30 years. And I think that growing with your partner is something that takes intention. It requires discussion. Growing together and not growing apart is one of my big goals for our marriage. Do I think love is enough for marriage? Hell no. I think it requires so much more than love. Probably love is a tiny fraction of what keeps our marriage together. And that's probably not the most romantic thing to say. But I think that it comes to being kind to one another, not being mean, which is something I struggle with, as weird as that is to say. Like I mentioned, I'm a little rough around the edges. I have to ensure that I am being loving and kind and compassionate towards him. I think that the logistics of marriage are important to think about. I also think family dynamics with extended family is a very important consideration. Love is important, but it is not everything. I think Corbin being a rock is good and bad, just like my personality has great things and not great things about it. One downside of him being so sturdy and so predictable is that when I want him to get really mad about stuff, he won't. He'll be like, that's not a big deal. It's fine. And I'm like, no, I want you to get mad about this. You know, if some doofus vendor at work pisses me off and I'm like, I want to send some nasty email. He's like, I would not do that. What are you going to accomplish with that? And I'm like, well, I'm going to let them know I'm mad. They fucked me over. And he's like, I don't think that that is a good decision, Lauren. Like, maybe why don't you sleep on it and see if tomorrow you feel the same way? And obviously he's always right. But then I have to remind myself that that's why I love him so much. You know, he is the calm to my storm in some situations. So when we first started dating, we both come from wonderful families. We decided that we wanted to have kids, but I told him, we have to wait until after my residency before we have kids. I think residency is going to be really hard. I think I'm going to be working a lot. I don't even know if you're allowed to have children. And I was going into a surgical residency, which I would say statistically, you work more hours than the non-surgical fields. So fast forward to halfway through residency, I just suddenly got this womanly ovary surge of hormones saying, wow, I think I want to have kids. This doesn't quite fit into the narrative that we had set when we first got married. And so that's when we started discussing, do we want to have children now? And what does that mean since I am working an insane number of hours? At the time, I was working about 80 hours a week. And that was just actually physically at the hospital. There was other stuff that I would do at home to study and that type of thing. So, after several months of discussion, we decided, no, I do think we are physically ready, emotionally ready to embark on the child production process. You guys know what that entails. But I thought at the time, I was like, oh, I will just go off on birth control and we'll get pregnant the next night. Like, obviously, I went to medical school. I didn't, there's more complexity than that. But it took us about a year to get pregnant. And so fast forward, you have the baby. At this point, role reversal is real. He was staying home with our child for a good portion of, his first few months of life. We couldn't get into daycare. I went back to work after like 3 weeks, which was insane. But he was really 100% dad and like 60% mom. And then I would show up for the other 40%. And so he looks back on those months and says, wow, that was really, really, really difficult. I don't know if I would ever do that again, knowing what I know now. But I think sometimes in life, it's good to not know how hard something's going to be, because then you wouldn't do it. If we knew how hard it was going to be for me to have a baby in residency and then for him to be at home and doing a lot of the parenting, I don't know if we would have done it. But we're both happy that we did. And then we decided to have a second child once I was in fellowship. And so that was much easier because work-wise, my demands weren't quite as great. Now our boys are 3 and 6 years old, and I could not be happier that we decided to have them when we did. We have decided that a family of 4 is plenty. So we got a little snip, snip. The vasectomy decision was very easy. And I will say, I did not get the vasectomy myself, obviously. Again, went to medical school. I knew what it was. I didn't want to be on birth control for my whole life. I also didn't want a whoopsie baby. And so pretty much as soon as we had our second child, I was like, hey, Corbin, there's this thing called a vasectomy where you go in for a small procedure and you are deemed infertile for the rest of your life. And I have scheduled you an appointment for that with one of our dear friends who's an amazing urologist. And my husband was like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll just do that. And now we have the reassurance policy that we are two and done. I think for all the young women out there who are still in the early stages of their career, are finding a partner for life, I think it's good to have discussions about having children and what you want as a family unit. But I also think you have to allow yourself the flexibility to change your mind like we did. You know, we started out saying, I don't want kids until after residency. And then halfway through, we reevaluated and said, actually, I think we do want to start a family now. I think the biggest advice I have for young people in medicine, particularly young females that want to go into surgery, is that don't ever let anybody tell you you can't with anything. Okay, that includes having kids and working. If you want to work part-time and stay at home a lot with your kids, you can. I have a great friend that works 70% of a full schedule and has tons of time at home with her daughter. They may be one and done. We'll see. Things are still kind of up in the air. She's a fellow physician. On the flip side, I have women that work here. One of our employees has 4 kids. And I'm like, how the hell do you keep track of all those humans? I don't understand. But I think everybody is just so different. And I think it's hard to make decisions about having kids and how many you want and when you want them at the early stage of your life and the early stages of your kind of professional growth. I think my biggest piece of advice is to just constantly reevaluate, be flexible. If you make a decision now, it's your decision to change. I relied heavily on my husband very early when we had both our boys. And so I think keeping the lines of communication open and just being your authentic self during those conversations is the most important. And then going back to when you do find someone that you think you want to be partners with, make sure that that person is someone that you can be your total self with. You don't have to filter yourself, censor yourself. You can be who you are at your core, because it gets even more important as you grow and you make these big decisions together. I think one thing that we struggle with personally is we both grew up very differently. My husband is of the mindset that you make money to spend it. So he's our big fancy vacationer, books fancy dinners, does all the big spending. I grew up very differently. I'm like of a rationing mindset. And so one thing that we've had to work through as a young couple with lots of responsibility is how do we delegate our spending? And that's something that's also flexible. It's constantly evolving. You know, for the first decade of our career, I made essentially no money. I was in medical school. I was in residency. During residency, you do have a small salary. But for us, the majority of my salary actually went towards my student loans. And then fellowship, you get paid like pennies. And then the first year or two of my practice, I didn't take a paycheck. So truly, you think back to my income over the last decade, and really I've only made money and contributed to our bank account the last like year or two. So I've just had to tell myself, you know, he does the majority of the earning. So even though I'm uncomfortable with some of his bigger spending items, decisions, etc., it's his money to spend. When it comes to conflict in our marriage, it's always the same thing. Over the last 10 years, I'm mean. I have mean segments that burst out of me. When I think about who I'm mean to the people that I'm most comfortable around, which is my husband. So whenever we have big conflicts, it's often about how I'm behaving towards him. And so now, if there's a night when I'm feeling spicy, and I'm usually not upset with him, I'm upset about something else, but it comes out as aggression and meanness towards him. I'm someone, like I said, I blow around. I'm the wind. I'm the storm. I'm forgive and forget. You know, if I'm not pleasant one evening or if he's not pleasant one evening, I'm like, wake up the next morning. Who cares? What are we doing today? You know, back to square one. I think he is a little bit more sensitive and he has a harder time kind of moving on from those episodes. So that is important for me to remember as often the perpetrator of the mean comments. And I have to tell myself that if I say something, it does not just wash away as quickly as it does for me with him. And again, we can all get better in certain areas. And so one thing that I have really worked on over the last several years with our marriage is to ensure that I'm not bringing stuff home and taking it out on him just because he's my rock and he's always there. I think the bigger topics are important to talk about. If something comes up in our marriage that I feel like is a conflict or something that I don't agree with, that's when I will schedule a babysitter to come watch our beautiful children, and we will go out to dinner. And I like to be able to give him my full attention when I'm bringing up a sticky topic that I want to talk to him about. I think discussing it at home with our wild boys running around, I can't ever get his full attention. And so if I feel like there's something that, we really need to sit down and talk about as a couple that's really important, that's when I will be intentional about getting him away from the chaos of the house, putting some fun meals and environment, maybe a little bit of wine paired with it. So that's something that I've learned that can be helpful with big discussions in marriage. So one thing recently has been, do we want to stay in our house that we're living in? That's obviously a huge decision. We bought our house about 3 years ago. I personally love it. It's where it feels like home. It's where we've raised our boys the last 3 years. But my husband is kind of itchy. He's like, I want to move somewhere. I want a bigger house. I want, this, that, and the other. And so we have spent quite a bit of time recently really sitting down and talking about the logistics, the finance, the not fun part about considering moving. That's something that we're currently working through that we probably have different opinions on, which is okay. Again, there's two whole humans in a marriage. And so while sometimes I get frustrated with his itchiness and wanting to move, I also recognize that it's really important to him right now to really fully consider that, think about our options, think about our finances. And so while I don't really want to talk about it or deal with it, it's important to him, so I need to make space for that. I think when I look forward into what's going to keep our marriage strong in the years to come, the word trust is what pops into my head. Trust in so many ways. Trust in terms of loving each other, growing together, being a good parent, a responsible parent, someone who's going to protect your children and keep them alive. But also trust from, if you think about divorce, breakups, all of that stuff, I think often infidelity is something that comes up. I trust my partner implicitly 100%. And I don't know necessarily why that is. Maybe we've both been fortunate enough to know where we've never had issues with that, obviously currently and in former relationships for both of us. I think if you're able to truly trust one another, that is so important for the longevity of your relationship. We're rounding out a decade of time together legally, and I think that my marriage is one of the best parts of my life. Certainly it's not perfect, and certainly it's not easy in certain days, but overall it's been such an incredible experience for me. We make each other better people, better parents, better professionals, and I'm really excited to grow with him and see how strong our marriage is in another decade. I think marriage is such a fun topic because it's something very ubiquitous, something we often don't talk about or really even sit down and think about intentionally. This is really the first time that I've opened up about my marriage, talked to you guys about some of the challenges and things that I'm looking forward to in the future. So I want you to go to the comments and leave some thoughts about marriage, whether you're married or not, maybe some goals for your own marriage, things that you guys have worked through. Let's keep the conversation going. Thanks again for tuning into Fem MD. And remember, the world belongs to the women who question it.